So thank you, sir, for your insights and essentially voicing not only your detailed views on the provisions, but also on the fiscal deficit rate. If there are any questions, we can take them from the audience. Okay, I think some two questions have come. Yes. Right.
Can you read it out? While inflation right now is at comfortable levels, what are the factors which will actually ensure the sustainability of these levels? How feasible is a 4% inflation target in an Indian context, given the historical average of around 7 to 8%. Then what is the second question? Given the historically low interest rate across several major global economies, will currently
be the adjusting factor.
What can be the possible repercussions for India of the rupee remains strong? Now these, not all of them are directly related to the budget, but let me answer that. Inflation has been partly helped by what happened to the crude oil prices. Certainly, that has moderated inflation. But even otherwise, if you look at it, after having remained at a very high level for almost 2.5 to 3 years, inflation has started coming down, but it has been somewhat helped to a large extent by the fall in oil prices. I do think that inflation will remain more or less at this level for some time to come. I don't see any immediate prospect of the oil prices going up, but that will not be a permanent situation, because sooner or later supply and demand will start equilibrating and oil prices will begin to rise. But hopefully for another year or a year and a half, I do not expect the oil prices to climb. One of the reasons for food inflation has been the prescription of a higher and higher level of minimum support prices. But this year, there has been some moderation with respect to the fixing of the, last year also it happened, in the fixing up of the MSP. And therefore, food inflation may not rise in the way in which it was happening before. Therefore, taking all the factors into account, I do believe that the inflation level will continue to remain more or less at the level that we have now reached for some more time. And the other question is that whether the prescription of a 4% inflation as the desirable target feasible or desirable. It is true that inflation has remained at a high level. The question says that the average is around 78%. But this average of 78% is of a period during which inflation has been raging in this country. I mean, I think those of you who remember the 1970s, there was a time when inflation rate even went to 20%. In the more recent period, it has been coming down, but the last 2-3 years, again, it has started climbing up. But I think it is important that we need to keep the inflation at a low level, because people talk about the competitiveness of Indian products. Now, the competitiveness of the Indian products cannot happen unless we have a reasonably low level of inflation. Now, once again, the new inflation targeting framework does not demand 4%. It also has a range, plus or minus 2%. Therefore, strong action is required only when inflation goes beyond 6%. That I think is reasonable. I think that we need to work towards that objective. And that is the most desirable objective. There's some question about the Indian rupee. Now, the Indian rupee has been fluctuating. Those of you can remember the recent history. After all, in 2014, May 22nd, post May 22nd, there was a sudden depreciation in the value of the rupee. Now it has strengthened since then, but the real effective exchange rate of the rupee, taking the relative inflation between India and the partner countries, has risen a little bit. That is because of the large capital inflows that come into the country. Now, normally, the exchange rate of a country is determined by the current account deficit. When the current account deficit is high, then the currency begins to depreciate. But when capital flows come in to compensate the current account deficit, then that effect is not there. Therefore, because of the large capital inflows that you have seen in this year, the rupee has appreciated, but it is my own view that we should not let the rupee appreciate too much, and should not let the rupee appreciate in real terms. We should work towards it. But then when the capital flows are large, the only way in which it can be done is by the central bank of the country buying the foreign currency and increasing its reserves. But there is a cost to it, because the Reserve Bank buying the currency and keeping it in reserves also imposes a certain cost to the economy. But I would believe that we should work towards a rate of exchange. The exchange rate of the rupee should be in such a way that it does not appreciate in real terms too much.
A few more questions. Okay.
Does India need inheritance tax as in the US or UK? Okay. And
There are different types of questions, so you probably can answer one after the other.
well, I think there is a justification for inheritance tax. And that is, of course, a tax which is also, so long as it is not horrendous, will not impose too much problem on on those who inherit the property. You remember in India there was a time when we had multiple taxes, wealth tax, income tax, inheritance tax of some type, and so on, which essentially meant that on an incremental income, nearly almost everything was taken away in the form of taxes. There was a time in India when the marginal rate of taxation on income was close to 93% or 94%. Then if on top of it you add an inheritance tax or a wealth tax, then the only way to pay tax is by selling the asset. I think these are absurd levels to which it can go. But if you ask me in principle whether there should be inheritance tax, I will say yes. We should have an inheritance tax levied at an appropriate level, beyond a certain level of acquisition of property, of inheritance of property. The sale of spectrum and coal auctions revenues, will this have favorable impact on fiscal deficit? I think it will have, but I think they must have taken into account already. Can even the budget review the economy and promote growth despite red tape, corruption, and I don't know, some management should... inefficient management, okay. And then what is the question? Should not economy grow from the grassroots? No, that I think it mixes a number of things. I mean, the need for good governance, I emphasized earlier, and obviously a good governance means a transparent administration. A transparent administration also implies automatically a corruption-free administration. These are important because people do not recognize the costs of corruption, the costs of inefficiency. They all go, they all magnify. And therefore, it is important that attention is paid to it. Now, it also talks about grassroots. Obviously, ultimately, it is all at the grassroots. If the economy grows, the economy is not an abstraction. Ultimately, it is the people who have to grow, and therefore, it must translate itself into the different people growing. Therefore, what we really need is create an environment in which, at the grassroots level, people can begin to grow. At the grassroots level, whether it is a company or whether it is an individual, he should be in a position to be able to move forward. After all, we are moving away from centralized planning. We are not really, we have moved away from the last 10, 15 years. We are not imposing on the system some central scheme of how things should be done. Even in the last few plans, the targets that are set are only indicative. You create an environment in which these targets can be achieved. Therefore, in my view, creating the proper environment for institutions at the grassroots level to grow is the best way to manage the economy. Given that PSU banks are provided with funds for capital infusion, how could the PSU banks face challenges for funding the economic growth? I don't quite understand this question, because the point is, government is the owner of the public sector banks. And there is a capital adequacy ratio which every bank, public or private, has to meet. Therefore, if the public sector banks are to provide increasing amount of credit, then the capital has also to increase. The capital adequacy ratio is related to the risk-weighted assets of the bank. As the bank's operations grow and the credit is enlarged, then a certain proportion of that is required in the form of equity capital. Now, that is what the adequacy ratio means. Now, it has been 8%, it is thought to be increased, but 8% of what? 8% of risk-weighted assets. There is no risk, zero risk as far as government paper is concerned. And the loans are weighted differently. Therefore, 8% of the risk-weighted assets are required to be kept in the form of capital. Therefore, as the economy grows and as credit expands, at least a part of that will have to be provided in the form of capital. It is that capital which is being provided by the government. Otherwise, what will happen? Otherwise, what will happen is the public sector banks will not be able to expand credit to the fullest extent, because the retained earnings of the banks will not be adequate. Therefore, even private sector banks are not just satisfied with, or not just plowing back the retained earnings. They go to the market and raise funds. As far as the public sector banks are concerned, they will also raise from the market 49%. But the 51% will have to come from the government, because at the present rule is that 51% of the capital should be held by the government. The majority ownership is with the government. Therefore, of the increased capital that is required to support a growing credit, 51% of it will have to be provided by the government. And that is what they are doing. In fact, I will invert the question. I will reverse the question and say, it is because of the government being able to provide that amount of capital, the banks are in a position to be able to provide larger amount of credit.
Thank you, sir, for answering the question in detail. And may I now request Lakshmi Narayan to come here and hand over a small memento to Dr. Rangarajan.
Thank you very much. Yes. We've been requested to go to the center.
Oh.
Thank you, sir. Now we come to the second part of our event, which is a panel discussion. And we have three eminent people as part of the panel. I'll introduce all of them and then request all of them to come here to the podium. This panel will be led and moderated by Mr. Ramesh Damani, and I've got great pleasure in introducing him to you. He is one of India's most renowned and respected experts in investing. He is a proponent of value investing and has a great personal record on investments. He is a member of the Bombay Stock Exchange. He holds a bachelor's degree from HR College in Mumbai and a master's degree in business administration from California State University. He started off in stockbroking, but what really excited him was identifying potentially successful businesses and investing in them for the long term. He is a regular speaker on a number of value investing forums. Mr. Ramesh Damani is one of the most well-known persons in the Indian equity market and a commentator on various financial issues. Sir, it's a privilege to have you with us today. The next panelist is Mr. Milind Barve. He is the Managing Director of HDFC Asset Management Company Limited, a joint venture of HDFC Limited and Standard Life Investments of UK. He was responsible for setting up the asset management business of HDFC in the year 2000. He has been with the HDFC Group for over 29 years and was heading HDFC Limited's treasury function till 2000. In HDFC Limited, Milind was responsible for raising funds from financial institutions and capital markets. He was also the head of marketing for retail deposit products and responsible for investment advisor relationships for Commonwealth Equity Mutual Fund and Invesco India Growth Fund. He holds a bachelor's degree in commerce and an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is on the board of Association of Mutual Funds in India, serving as its chairman from March 2011 to September 2013. He is also on the board of Financial Planning Standards Board and Institution for Mutual Fund Intermediaries. He has been appointed as a member of various committees set up by SEBI from time to time for mutual funds and financial sector, and part of the Technical Advisory Committee reconstituted by the RBI in May 2012. Presently, he is part of the high-level committee for reviewing SEBI Prohibition of Insider Trading Regulations 1992. I also welcome Mr. Barve. And we also have with us Mr. Nilesh Shah, who is the Managing Director of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. He is a chartered accountant and has a cost accountant and has over 2 decades of experience in capital markets and financial services industry, having managed funds across equity and fixed income securities for local and global investors. He has held leadership positions in a number of large organizations, both domestic and multinational. Prior to joining Kotak Mahindra Asset Management, Nilesh worked as the Chief Executive Officer of Axis Capital, the investment banking arm of Axis Bank, between 2010 and 2014. In ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, he served as the Chief Investment Officer from 2004 to 2010 and as Head of Debt in Franklin Templeton between 1997 and 2004. In 2003, Nilesh received the inaugural Business Standard Fund Manager of the Year Fixed Income, and in 2007 he received the inaugural CA Professional Manager of the Year Private Sector. He has also co-authored a book on financial planning called A Direct Take. It's a pleasure to have you with us.